Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. Today we're exploring a heavy but important topic, corruption at the highest levels of power. Specifically, we'll be looking at 10 African leaders whose names have become synonymous with allegations of grand corruption. Some of them looted state funds, others maintained power through intimidation, and still others manipulated entire systems to benefit themselves and their inner circles. While each leader's story is unique, they all serve as cautionary examples of how unchecked power can lead to deep-rooted injustices that affect millions of people. Let's jump right in. First, Sani Abacha, Nigeria 1993 to 1998. General Sani Abacha seized power in Nigeria in 1993, taking the reins after a period of political instability. Although he promised order and reform, his 5-year rule became synonymous with human rights abuses and the systemic looting of the Nigerian treasury. Abacha's regime clamped down on opposition through detentions and media censorship, which further shielded his administration from scrutiny. One of the hallmark corruption scandals associated with Abacha is commonly referred to as the Abacha loot. Investigations by Nigerian and international authorities uncovered billions of dollars allegedly siphoned out of the country's coffers under his direct supervision. Much of this money was stashed in foreign bank accounts, particularly in Switzerland and the United Kingdom. Over the years, efforts to recover these funds have led to the repatriation of significant sums, though much remains unaccounted for. Beyond direct theft, Abacha's rule also exemplified cronyism. He often rewarded loyalists with positions of power and lucrative state contracts, eliminating dissenting voices along the way. Upon his death, in 1998, Nigeria entered a transitional phase towards civilian rule. Despite a legacy tainted by corruption, Abacha's supporters still attempt to portray him as a strong leader who brought a degree of stability. However, his name continues to serve as one of the most cited examples of kleptocratic governance on the African continent.
The following decisions come into immediate effect. The interim national government is hereby dissolved. The national and state assemblies are also dissolved. The state executive councils are dissolved. The brigade commanders are to take over from the governors in their states until administrators are appointed. Where there are no brigade commanders, the commissioners of police in the states are to take over. All local governments stand dissolved. The directors of personnel are to take over the administration of the local governments until administrators are appointed. The National Electoral Commission is hereby dissolved.
Second, Mobutu Sese Seko, Zaire DR Congo, 1965 to 1997. Born Joseph Désiré Mobutu, Mobutu Sese Seko came to power in 1965 in what was then known as the Republic of the Congo, later renamed Zaire, and now the Democratic Republic of the Congo. During his more than 3 decades in power, Mobutu cultivated a personality cult, changing the country's name and enforcing authenticity, a program aimed at restoring African cultural identity. Yet under the guise of national pride, Mobutu's regime systematically looted state resources. Mobutu's personal fortune became emblematic of the so-called kleptocratic state. At one point, his wealth was estimated in the billions of dollars, even as his country sank into economic despair. Zaire's infrastructure crumbled, hospitals and schools deteriorated, and public servants often went unpaid for months or even years. Mobutu was alleged to have diverted foreign aid into personal accounts, effectively turning donor assistance into a steady flow of cash for himself and his inner circle. His rule ended in 1997, when rebel forces led by Laurent Désiré Kabila took control of the country. Mobutu fled into exile, dying shortly afterward. Although he is sometimes credited with forging a national identity out of a sprawling country, the overshadowing reality is that the DRC still suffers many of the consequences of his corrupt and autocratic rule. His era remains a stark example of the adverse effects of long-term personalized governance without transparency or accountability. 3. Robert Mugabe, Zimbabwe 1980 to 2017. Robert Mugabe was a leading figure in Zimbabwe's independence movement, Initially lauded as a liberation hero, when he ascended to power in 1980, many hoped his leadership would usher in a new era of prosperity and equality. Over time, however, his regime came under intense criticism for corruption, economic mismanagement, and authoritarian tactics. One of the most controversial policies under Mugabe's watch was the land reform program, which aimed to address colonial-era injustices by redistributing land from white commercial farmers to black Zimbabweans. However, critics argue that the process was often chaotic, violent, and largely benefited Mugabe's political allies rather than ordinary citizens. This contributed to a major contraction of Zimbabwe's agricultural output, once a cornerstone of the economy. As hyperinflation gripped Zimbabwe in the 2000s, Mugabe's administration was accused of cronyism, with high-level officials enriching themselves through special privileges and business opportunities. An elite group surrounding Mugabe reportedly exploited state resources, while public sector wages became nearly worthless. By the time Mugabe was ousted in a 2017 military coup, the aging leader left behind a deeply fragile economy and a governance system riddled with patronage. Fourth, Teodoro Obiang Nguema Mbasogo, Equatorial Guinea 1979-present. Teodoro Obiang Nguema Mbasogo is Africa's longest-serving president, having ruled Equatorial Guinea since 1979. His takeover was itself controversial, as he deposed and executed his uncle, President Francisco Macias Nguema. Though the country's abundant oil reserves have brought significant wealth, this prosperity has not been broadly shared among the population. Equatorial Guinea continues to struggle with high levels of inequality and underdeveloped public services. International watchdogs like Global Witness and Human Rights Watch have documented alleged large-scale misappropriation of oil revenues by Obiang and his close associates. Obiang's son, Teodoro Nguema Obiang Mange, known as Teodorin, has faced corruption investigations in multiple jurisdictions, including the United States and France. Assets seized in these cases range from luxury cars to mansions and other opulent purchases far exceeding any official salary. Critics say Obiang's administration maintains power through strict control of media, security services, and political opponents. Despite repeated calls by human rights organizations for transparency and accountability, Equatorial Guinea remains largely closed to external scrutiny. Obiang's longevity in office is credited to the oil wealth that finances extensive patronage, ensuring loyalty from key military and political figures. 5. Omar al-Bashir, Sudan 1989 to 2019. Omar Hassan al-Bashir came to power through a military coup in 1989, seizing control of Sudan and establishing an authoritarian government that remained in place for 3 decades. His tenure was marked by regional conflicts, most notably in Darfur, where his government has been accused by the International Criminal Court, ICC, of war crimes and crimes against humanity. Economically, Bashir's regime faced numerous allegations of corruption, patronage, and the exploitation of state-owned enterprises for personal gain. In April 2019, Bashir was toppled by a popular uprising backed by the military. Soon after his removal, authorities reportedly found large sums of cash, both foreign and local currency, inside his residence. He was subsequently tried and convicted on some corruption charges in Sudanese courts. Despite these convictions, public debates about how to handle the broader allegations of war crimes have continued. Some Sudanese support the idea of handing Bashir over to the ICC, while others favor a national judicial process. Regardless of the final outcome, Bashir's fall from power punctuated decades of protest over corruption and human rights abuses, marking a watershed moment for the Sudanese people's quest for transparency and democratic governance. 6. Yahya Jammeh, the Gambia, 1994 to 2017. Yahya Jammeh took power in the Gambia in 1994 through a bloodless coup and proceeded to rule for 22 years. Initially seen by some as a devout and charismatic leader, Jammeh soon acquired a reputation for authoritarianism. Opposition figures were intimidated, the media was heavily controlled, and political freedoms were severely curtailed during his tenure. Jammeh's name is closely associated with allegations of grand corruption. Investigations by the Gambia's post-Jammeh administration exposed evidence that he and his associates had looted millions of dollars from state enterprises. Reports indicate that Jammeh also relied on an elaborate system of patronage, funneling resources to supporters while silencing critics. After losing the 2016 presidential election to Adama Barrow, Jammeh initially refused to step down, triggering a constitutional crisis. He eventually departed the country in early 2017 under regional and international pressure, reportedly fleeing with substantial funds and luxury cars. Since his exile, the Gambia has been attempting to recover the lost assets. A commission of inquiry established by the new government found multiple bank accounts linked to Jammeh and shell companies that facilitated the misappropriation of funds. His case remains a subject of debate, as some Gambians demand his extradition to face trial, while others prioritize reconciliation efforts. 7. Hosni Mubarak, Egypt, 1981 to 2011. Hosni Mubarak led Egypt for 3 decades, having assumed the presidency after the assassination of Anwar Sadat in 1981. Over the course of his rule, Mubarak positioned himself as a strongman who maintained stability in a volatile region. However, underneath that image, accusations of corruption festered. He and his close family members, particularly his sons Allah and Gamal, were alleged to have accumulated vast wealth through privileged access to business deals and crony capitalism. Public frustration over corruption was one of the key factors behind the 2011 Egyptian revolution, part of the wider Arab Spring movement. When mass protests in Tahrir Square led to Mubarak's resignation, legal proceedings against him and his sons soon followed. They faced charges related to the embezzlement of public funds and abuse of authority. While certain convictions were handed down, some were later overturned on appeal, highlighting the complexity of holding former heads of state accountable under legal systems they once tightly controlled. Mubarak died in 2020, leaving a mixed legacy. To some, he was a security-focused ruler who ensured a degree of economic development and international alliances. To many Egyptians, though, his reign represented 3 decades of stifled political freedom, deep-seated corruption, and an economy that benefited a select elite. 9. Jacob Zuma, South Africa, 2009 to 2018. Jacob Zuma's presidency in South Africa was marked by a high-profile corruption saga that overshadowed many of his administration's achievements. Zuma rose through the ranks of the African National Congress, ANC, and served as deputy president before succeeding Thabo Mbeki. Early in his presidency, Zuma faced the Nkandla scandal, in which public funds were used for upgrades on his private homestead. These purported security enhancements included items such as a swimming pool and an amphitheater, sparking public outrage and investigations by the public protector. However, the largest scandal that engulfed Zuma's government was state capture, involving the powerful Gupta family, who were allegedly given undue influence over cabinet appointments and awarded lucrative state contracts. Accusations included manipulating key sectors such as energy, transportation, and media, thereby draining state-owned enterprises of resources and eroding public trust in government. By 2018, internal pressure within the ANC forced Zuma to resign. Judicial inquiries into state capture continued, culminating in Zuma being ordered to appear before the commission investigating these allegations. His refusal to comply led to a constitutional crisis and a prison sentence for contempt of court. Though released on medical parole, Zuma remains a polarizing figure in South Africa, emblematic of the grave damage corruption can inflict on democratic institutions. 10th, Paul Biya, Cameroon 1982-present. Paul Biya stands among Africa's longest-serving leaders, having first taken office in 1982 and maintaining power ever since. His rule has drawn criticism for alleged corruption, patronage, and an opaque approach to governance. Although Cameroon's economy has grown in certain sectors, much of the population remains in poverty, with inadequate infrastructure and limited social services. Transparency International has repeatedly pointed to Cameroon as struggling with significant levels of corruption, citing large-scale embezzlement of public funds. Critics argue that Biya's long tenure has created an environment where loyalty is rewarded over competence. Accusations of lavish overseas stays, particularly in Geneva, where he reportedly spends extended periods, have further fueled resentment among Cameroonians. Meanwhile, the government is regularly accused of stifling dissent, restricting press freedom, and using security forces to suppress political opponents and activists. Biya's ability to maintain control rests partly on the loyalty of top military and political officials, many of whom benefit from the current system. Nonetheless, increasing socio-economic disparities and an ongoing separatist crisis in Cameroon's Anglophone regions have put the spotlight on Biya's leadership style and raised questions about the sustainability of his rule. Observers wonder what might happen to the nation's stability when the eventual transition of power occurs, given the deep-rooted networks of patronage. The trajectories of these 10 leaders, Sani Abacha, Mobutu Sese Seko, Robert Mugabe, Teodoro Obiang Nguema Mbasogo, Omar al-Bashir, Yahya Jammeh, Hosni Mubarak, Zine Abidine Ben Ali, Jacob Zuma, and Paul Biya, highlight different dimensions of corruption and the myriad ways it can manifest within governance structures. Some rose to power as liberators or reformers, but ultimately succumbed to or perpetuated endemic corruption, often facilitated by weak checks and balances, the politicization of security forces, and a lack of political will to enforce accountability. These cases also reveal that despite the resilience of corrupt systems, public frustration can eventually reach a boiling point, whether through mass protests, military coups, or international legal interventions. Corrupt leaders often face a reckoning that can happen swiftly and dramatically. Yet the aftermath of these reckoning moments, be it the transitional justice process in the Gambia, constitutional reforms in Tunisia, or commissions investigating state capture in South Africa, shows the complexity of undoing decades of institutionalized graft. Ultimately, the lessons to be drawn from these legacies underscore the urgent need for transparency, robust institutions, and civic participation. Anti-corruption bodies must be independent, civil society organizations require freedom to operate, and the rule of law must be upheld for all citizens, irrespective of rank or political affiliation. Only with sustained structural reforms and collective vigilance can nations move past the corrosive effects of corruption and chart a path toward equitable growth and genuine democracy. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this video informative, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more deep dives into history, politics, and current events. What are your thoughts on the impacts of corruption in leadership? Let me know in the comments below. Stay curious, stay informed, and I'll see you in the next video.